Please welcome Natan and Stefan.
Thanks for making it. Man, it's wild out there.
Yeah. Do you know who's who? I'm Stefan.
Yeah, I'm Natan Last. And I'm from New York, so
and I'm Stefan Fatsis.
Yeah, exactly.
So, right.
We're a
Spoonerism
1920s
thing.
comedy duo.
Yes, we are. We're going on the vaudeville circuit when we're done with this. Thank you all for coming out. Really appreciate it. It is great to be here, and it is great to be talking to my friend Natan. We've overlapped in our worlds of crosswords and Scrabble and dictionaries. But we only met a few months ago. We hung out and had lunch together, which was amazing. And I'm really proud of this book. I mean, this is kind of really a terrific read. The most interesting, thoughtful, intellectual, intelligent book about crosswords. And I've read lots of books about crosswords. And this is really it's a piece of reporting, but it is also a meditation. And it is almost scholarly in nature. But before we sort of get into that, I wanted to start off by asking the audience a few questions. All right, who does the New York Times crossword puzzle every day? Every day? No, that's a specific question. Who does it online? Who does it in print? Wow, more than I would have expected. Okay, and of the 7 of us that still do it in print, how many of you are under the age of 50? 1, 2. Okay, great. Awesome. Natan, how do you do the puzzle?
I mostly do it on the app, but I love solving in print. It's way better.
Yeah.
And I grew up as a paper and pen solver, so there's a big nostalgia there.
I will tell my story of how I do the puzzle later. I thought we'd start with a little lightning round for Natan, now that we've got out of the way the fact that only old people do the crossword puzzle in print, mostly. All right, are you an across or down guy?
I swing both ways. No, I think I start with the across.
Okay.
I like to be able to read it right away, you know?
All right,
More legible.
And are you how do you solve the puzzle? Do you just do the acrosses? Are you one of those crazy, incredibly brilliant people that can just go straight across? Or do you have a different system?
Definitely not. I'm kind of a hunt and peck solver, so I will get one big answer. I go straight for, and it's easier to see this if you're solving in print, the fill in the blank clues. And if I can get one of those, I use that as a toehold and attack that region.
And do you care how fast you're doing the puzzle?
Not really. It's nice when I do it real fast, so that feels good, but I don't track my times that much. Do you?
Oh, no, because I do it in print. So
right.
I'm not that crazy. I'm not setting a stopwatch on my iPhone to see how fast I'm doing it. I don't care that much. And I'm old and slower than I probably was 20 years ago, though I think I'm better at completing puzzles than I was 20 years ago.
Yeah. Well, there's a huge overlap between crosswordese and Scrabble vocabulary. So your Scrabble journey must have made you a better solver, I imagine.
Oh, I think absolutely. But I think mostly because I started doing crossword puzzles like you when I was in high school, and I started in the Eugene Maleska era, so pre-Will Shorts. So there was a lot more crosswordese. I remember my 2 favorite clues that I remember from high school were mineshaft entrance.
At it.
And the other was Nanking Nana.
Mom.
Yes, one of the old, vaguely racist clues in the New York Times crossword.
There's a bunch of those.
There's a lot of those, yeah. All right, you start each chapter of this book with a clever, interesting clue. You open the book with Will Shortz, the editor of the New York Times' favorite clue, which is it turns into a different story. And the answer is Spiral Staircase. Have you read Natan's book, or did you just think of that right away? Because you're okay. All right. Cheater.
And, there are some people who know ball here for sure.
Yeah.
There are some crossword knowers.
So what's the favorite clue you have ever written?
That I've written. So one, I'll give 2, which is certainly cheating. But a friend of mine needed a clue for make-out session, and my clue was neck stretch, which is a period of time in which one is necking.
That's pretty good.
That level of chittering is what to expect
Yes.
from these sorts of clues. It's like
Well, you write about how cluing is part dad joke,
Exactly.
part like homework assignment.
and because these are sort of meant to be read, saying it out loud is kind of like getting a transcript for stand-up comedy. It just doesn't really work. But my other favorite clue is they might be put on a stretcher. 9 letters, and the answer is yoga pants.
Very nice.
Yep, there you go.
Very nice. See, a little groaning, a little that's clever. That ticks all the boxes. All right. As you will learn from reading Across the Universe, you interned for Will Shortz when you were in high school. Give us one piece of Will Shortz trivia.
My favorite Will Shortz trivia is that he eats like someone living in a fallout shelter. So every day it was sort of Campbell's soup and a microwave chicken patty. My mother is a Moroccan chef. She's a very talented cook. I grew up eating interesting food, and I had this kind of reverse exoticism when I went to Will's. I was like, ooh, Campbell's soup. Never had that.
All right, and finally, last lightning round question. This one is kind of a deep cut for New York Times crossword historians. Pick one of the 3 New York Times crossword editors before Will Shortz to have dinner with. Margaret Farrar, Will Wang, or Eugene Maleska, and why?
Definitely not Maleska. So Maleska was a New York City superintendent, Latin teacher, and just general grump. I mean, I feel like he's the original sort of well actually guy. I feel like he would be correcting me left and right, and that's not pleasant. I think Margaret Farrar, who is there at the crossword's birth, so she assists Arthur Wynne at the New York World, who's the first person to generate a crossword puzzle. She is the inaugural editor at the New York Times and convinces the paper to adopt a puzzle.
And this is almost 20 years after
That's right.
the adoption, or after 30 years almost, after the first crossword puzzle appears in a New York newspaper.
Yeah, first puzzle is 1913. There's then, a kind of crossword craze in the mid-20s, spurred by Margaret Farrar and other people's book, the crossword puzzle book in 1924, Simon & Schuster's first ever offering. Then Pearl Harbor comes along, and she writes a letter to the Sunday Times editor saying, people are stressed, there will be bleak blackout hours, you can't think of your troubles while solving a crossword. And a few months later, she is installed as the editor.
All right, since we're there, let's talk a little bit more about the history of the crossword. It emerges kind of out of a newspaper war in the boom years of the mid 20s. Kind of not different from how crosswords have re-exploded in the last decade.
Definitely. I mean, it's definitely we're in a crossword craze now, which is sort of an echo of the craze of the 20s. And the first puzzle runs in 1913. It's the product at the New York World of innovations in printing technology. So the ability to, with a high-speed rotary press, get the grid onto the newsprint creates what some Deb Amlin puckishly calls the first mobile game. You can actually just print the grid on the paper. And the puzzle is kind of an overnight sensation, at least in New York. This is the era of, Joseph Pulitzer building what was then the largest building, the tallest building in all of Manhattan. Newspapers were big business. They were centers of culture.
Pulitzer's World had a daily circulation of over a million
yeah,
for a while.
Exactly. And it was the kind of thing that the crossword attaches itself to. Pulitzer, when he gets that high-speed rotary press, is like, I think we'll reprint the greats of Western art. We can do reds and blues. And then eventually decides we're going to do comics because that's what sells. So the puzzle and newspaper economics in general are always orbiting the high and the low brow. And the puzzle does extremely well. Arthur Wynne, the inaugural editor at the New York World, kind of tricks people into generating their own content for free. He dares his solvers to see if they can come up with a puzzle, and so they send them in, are paid nothing, and he prints them. Really.
Crowdsources the puzzle.
Yeah.
I mean, and this is interesting. Crowdsourcing we think of as a modern phenomenon. Crowdsourcing was the birth of the crossword puzzle. Crowdsourcing was how, my new book, Unabridged, is about the world of dictionaries. The Oxford English Dictionary was the product of crowdsourcing in a lot of ways. I mean, it's fascinating how people exploited the masses to create these products that have lasted hundreds of years.
Yeah, and the puzzle is meant to be a distraction right out of the gate. In the 40s, so the Times doesn't want to add a puzzle. The New York Times has this line, strictly a newspaper without puzzles, without comics, right?
Like that was like an advertisement,
It was
right?
an advertisement.
It was like a
in the
marketing
paper.
slogan.
They sort of self-styled as the last adult in the newsroom, right? We are the ones who have not been taken in by this craze. And when Margaret Farrar is installed as the editor, those early puzzles are meant to be a distraction from World War II, but can't help but blurt out things about the war. How could you not talk about the war? And so you'll see an answer, the clue will read something like graveyard for Nazi subs, and the answer will be the Atlantic Ocean. And it's like, yeah, we got them. It's like this weird way of talking about the war, but pretending you're not to. And the puzzle kind of echoes that today, where during COVID, there's an enormous uptick in solvership. There are all of these outlets that are installing digital games, expanding their offerings. The New York Times, of course, buys Wordle in 2021. That announcement where the Times talks about buying Wordle is really kind of full of doublespeak, because it, is interested in the way that the New York Times is the essential resource for anyone who wants to engage with and learn about the world. The New York Times games are apparently like a big part of that, right? But it has nothing to do with the rest of the world other than its immense cross-subsidization of, the International Reporting Desk and so on.
I want to go back a little bit and talk about you and how you got here. I mentioned you interned for Will Shortz, but how does a high school kid in Brooklyn wind up taking the subway and the Metro North train to get to Will Shortz's house in Westchester County?
Yeah, it was too long. It took too long. I went to high school in New York City, and we'd get the New York Times delivered to AP US history class, supposedly so we could read up on current events, and then we had a free period afterwards. And friends and I would cluster around the puzzle and be forced to collectivize our knowledge just to get past Tuesday. And that was really fun to see that it required different lanes of intelligence, different lanes of know-how, and I was hooked. I think I'm one of those people who enjoys doing impressions. I kind of wanted to know what it would feel like to write a New York Times style crossword, to see if I could mimic the syntax and get the dad jokes right and get the erudition spread in the right way. And so I submitted puzzles to the Times, which is freelance. You just mail an envelope to Will Shortz's house.
No, that's how it was. Yeah,
that's how it was. It's just 150 envelopes a week to get delivered to 55 Great Oak Lane, this beautiful old Tudor home. And he would read every single one.
Is Will upset that you've doxed him, by the way?
I think that his no.
Okay.
I think that his address is kind of a matter of public record in a way. I mean, have you been to the house?
I've not been to the house.
It's kind of a shrine to puzzles.
Oh, yeah.
The clock in the attic where he would do his editing and I would accompany him. The hour and the minute hands are pencils and the background is a crossword. There are these huge cases of knickknacks from the craze in the 20s, crossword print buckles, crossword print dresses, all of these ephemera from the age.
And Will has bequeathed his entire collection to Indiana University, where he attended and majored in enigmatology,
right,
which he made up.
He made it up.
And Indiana already has the biggest collection of games and puzzles from the 18th and 19th centuries. And they also acquired, plug for my own book, Unabridged, they also acquired the dictionary collection of a woman named Madeline Kripke, who had 20,000 books in her apartment in New York City and died during COVID. She was the most prolific dictionary collector ever. And Indiana acquired that. So Indiana is this sort of hub for words and language.
Pour one
and Will
out
is
for
part of that.
a true New York hoarder. That's
oh my God.
It's like a good way to be.
Yeah. So you got to go to Will's house. I got to go to her apartment.
Yeah,
which was
exactly.
Pretty cool.
Yeah. And I, like I said, was interested in seeing if I could produce a New York Times like grid. My dad is a middle school math teacher, and so scratch paper in my home was always graph paper, and I would doodle with words trying to get them across. It didn't feel like making a puzzle. It felt like drawing. It felt like trying to get the words to intersect. Submitted my first puzzle when I was a sophomore in high school. composed a sort of squeaky voiced cover letter with the help of my dad. And Will took it, and at that moment was really interested in, puzzles can seem like an old man's game. He wanted to cultivate the next generation of not just solvers, but constructors, and reached out to me over email and said, just how old are you? And, I told him the truth. And
so this is what, early 2000s?
Yeah. 2000 and, 2006, I want to say. And
so based on the one submission he reached out to you, it must have been a pretty fucking good puzzle.
He took it. It was like all children of teachers. I'm a class clown and a teacher's pet. And it was a puzzle themed around trigonometry. And they had a rebus, so we can talk about, I'm sure everyone hates those, but it was when you squeeze a bunch of letters into one box. And this was a rebus with the trigonometric functions. So Disco Stew hides, the Simpsons character hides COS. And then Cosmo Kramer also hides COS.
And Simpsons character, but a lot of people in this room really appreciated that too.
Yeah.
Especially in 2006. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And so, that puzzle ran, and he was...
Your first submission ran? Oh my God, I hate you.
Got lucky.
Because I'm 0 for 6.
Well, yeah, we have a session after this to fix that, for sure.
So he then hires you as his intern.
Yeah, he was like, you live in New York, take the train for 2.5 hours to my house, and we can edit together. And it was amazing. I mean, the Sunday NPR puzzles that he ran, he would test them out on me in the living room when I got there. And this is pre my relationship to coffee. So I just gotten off the train, a teen 2.5 hours later, and he was like, name 6 capitals that if you rearrange the letters spell something else. And I was like, I'm gonna need a minute. But he would tweak them if I got them too easily. He would make them harder. And so the whole house was this just throbbing brain of puzzling and wordplay.
Amazing. All right, the subtitle of your book is The Past, Present, and Future of the Crossword Puzzle. But the book is, I think, really much more than that. It's a meditation on the place of the humble grid in American culture. And I think the American part is really important, the way the crossword has extended its reach into our culture way beyond the breakfast table. And that, I think, is a Will Short's, partly responsible. But it was even before Will. The crossword had this place in American life. Why do you think that is?
I mean, when the puzzle comes out in the 20s, so it's invented in 13, but becomes a real household thing in the 20s, there's enormous backlash to it. So this is the gauzy aftermath of World War I. Everyone's jazzing and lindying and doing all sorts of 1920s fun things. And the puzzle is seen as a craze, a madness. It's demeaned as crossword-itis. These people who would do anything just to solve another puzzle. And people are solving instead of doing their jobs. It has this distinctly American, especially in the 1910s and 20s, cast of leisure is a new thing. We just kicked butt in World War I. We want to kind of recapture that energy in competitive fads. So it's the same time as yo-yoing contests. It's the birth of beauty pageants.
Flagpole
sitting, which is, it is what it sounds like. It doesn't really make a lot of sense, but it's a wonderful thing. And so all of these marathon games that are about the competitiveness that war encourages, but cast at frivolity, are all the rage in this moment. And the puzzle, I think, has a special place among those other artifacts because it feels productive and unproductive. Feels like intellectual labor, but it's also this silly game. It canonizes important names and words that we all ought to know or feel shamed into thinking we ought to know because of the puzzle, but also it's discardable. It's one and done. You solve it and then move on to the next one. So as I say in the book, I think the puzzle is this particularly capacious object that can do, work and leisure in a way that other games and fads seem not to.
And I will make the parallel with my own passion, Scrabble, which emerged after World War II and took off for a lot of the same reasons. It was perceived as this thing that is at once a game, but also important. It's about education. It's about competing with the Soviets. Sort of different times, but sort of similar trajectories for why these things become embedded in American culture.
Yeah, and they have this they have this profile of, the erudite do them, but also there is a hint of meritocratic and democratized community. And so the puzzle becomes, a mass movement in an era of mass movement. Railroad stocks its seatbacks with crossword puzzles. There is reportage about the way, welders and stenographers and illustrators and everyone at the office can do the puzzle. Everyone at the office can access that middle class lifestyle that's also pulling from high and low brow.
Right. So if you pay a nickel for the New York Times or any other newspaper, you have access to the same intellectual pastime as anybody else.
Exactly.
And in the book, you write about the crossword in and reflecting cultural life, modernist literature, art, music, movies, theater, television. The crossword is both a prop and it's a medium. And I love your reporting here. I mean, the historical narrative passages about the relationship between the puzzle and these different aspects of American life are really great. And do you think all of this has happened, the extension of the puzzle into these disparate parts of American culture, because if you look hard enough, you can find references to anything, anywhere? Or is there something universal about the crossword that has encouraged these other media to adopt it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting question. I think it is, and I think I sort of have to say it's the latter. The puzzle, the puzzle is a big thing in the early 1920s. When Max Schuster, who is one of the founders of Simon & Schuster, whose first offering ever is a crossword puzzle book, and it kind of underwrites their entire catalog for the next
fun
forever.
Fact, the crossword puzzle spawns 3 of the biggest publishing houses in American history.
That's right.
It's crazy.
It's insane, yeah.
I didn't know this.
It's wild. Margaret Farrar, who makes a ton of money in royalties from the crossword puzzle book in 1924, her and her father invested in Standard Oil and U.S. Steel. And then when her much less formidable husband, John C. Farrar, wants to start a publishing house, he's a poet, he's been in the war, he asks his wife to underwrite it, and she's able to. Yep. She's like, I got this. And that is, one of the ways that, so FSG, Farrar, Straus, Giroux, Simon & Schuster,
and then Random House.
Right. When Max Schuster leaves Bonai and Liveright, the publishing house he was working at before, he handpicks Bennett Cerf as his replacement. When he leaves, it's 1922, and Horace Liveright has just come back from Paris, where he's offered T.S. Eliot $125 to publish The Wasteland in America.
Good deal.
The crossword is just historically a modernist poetic object, and Eliot was a big solver. People compared his puzzles, or his poetry, to puzzles. There was this movement called the Crossword Puzzle School that produced poetry that people took to be ciphers, that if you just had the key, you could solve it and understand it. Gertrude Stein was a similar story. People reviewed Tender Buttons and said, eating toffee is nothing compared to this stuff. Crossword puzzles and toffee and Tender Buttons, same level of sticky difficulty, right? The idea that syntax, which is the kind of syntax you would get in an interesting crossword clue, is obfuscating in the same way that hard poetry is. So poetry especially and crosswords grow up together. But visual art, Rosalind Krauss, who's this wonderful art critic, has the seminal paper called Grids. And it's about the way that, the dawn of the skyscraper is also happening in the 20s. These big newspaper buildings, right? Joseph Pulitzer's New York World isn't just a feat of reportage and human resources. It's also an incredible building, and a beautiful and difficult to make skyscraper. And so the way that urban planning is proceeding at this time is reminding people of what the grid can do, the way it promises orderliness but transcendence, the way it seems sort of secular and on the ground but also has this kind of cosmic energy to it. And visual artists are taking that up. There's a Russian artist named Kazimir Malevich who paints these beautiful black square grids. And in the book, I sort of juxtapose that right next to a photo of one of the crossword editors at the New York World, and it just looks the same, right? And this idea that Rothko expanses of white and then big, interesting blocks of black squares have a similar effect on the viewer.
And this is like one of my favorite sections of the book. Natan sort of takes beautiful designed crosswords by some of the best crossword puzzle constructors, and he kind of creates the equivalent of museum wall explanations for the art. It's really funny and also kind of beautiful at the same time. And this also got me thinking about my own, again, Scrabble subculture. You know, the Scrabble board is 15 by 15, just like a daily crossword puzzle is 15 by 15. And I love taking pictures of my Scrabble games and then posting them on Facebook, and I love the way they look. And it's when I'm reading this section, it made me think like they're kind of inverted, right? You're creating the final grid when you're making a crossword puzzle. The crossword puzzle to me felt like it's more like, you know, Joseph Albers or Mondrian. It's like looking for order, and Scrabble boards are more like Jackson Pollock. It's chaos in the end when you're done. And it really made me think sort of more deeply about sort of how art and game and words merge here.
Yeah, I mean, there's an entire section of this book that's devoted to this philosopher C.T. Nguyen, who wrote an amazing book called Games, Agency is Art. And he's really interested in the way that when a new medium emerges on the scene, we tend to talk about it in the language of a proximate medium. So when photography happens, people can only talk about it in terms of painting. And he's interested in the way that games have suffered the same fate. You know, we talk about a video game's cinematic graphics, or we talk about its novelistic narrative wrapper, right? But games and all mediums have medium-specific effects, right? What a game actually works in is the medium of you doing stuff, the medium of agency, right? What's beautiful in a game is your movements. You know, the graphics are pretty, the novel, like the sort of narrative wrapper can be interesting, but your movements through the game are what are most interesting to this philosopher. And I think to me, and to your point, it's really interesting to see after the fact a circulating Scrabble grid and wonder at what moves got us there. Where did it start? Where was there combat? Where did someone, narrow themselves into a 2-word battle, right? You can kind of recreate or backform that narrative. And crossword grids are the same. I mean, because I'm a paper and pen solver, I used to love getting the Saturday paper and looking at the Friday answers. And they're severed from their clues. You don't really know what's going on, but it's just a beautiful collection of words, right? And I imagine Scrabble grids can have that same interesting effect.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that overlap. For me, that's important when I do the puzzle because it connects my two passions, right? But the contents of the crossword grid are much more. We haven't talked about the sort of the language element and the content element of the crossword puzzle, because on the one hand, it's obviously trivia, right. It's knowledge, it's politics, it's wordplay, it's a way to affirm your intelligence, but at the same time, it can have the effect of bringing you down and making you feel old and out of touch and stupid, inadequate, speaking from personal experience here. But I think that's part of the reason it's also invested with so much cultural power.
Yeah, I mean, it's impossible. There's this, forever rhythm of a new generation of crossword solvers and constructors inflecting the grids and clues that they make and write with their sensibilities. How could it be otherwise? And so there's this wonderful history of, when Will Shortz comes on the scene, there's an older guard of solvers who are like, who is Brian Eno? And why do I need to know about him? Or in what way do get down and boogie mean the same thing? You have this, suite of complaints that Will Shortz gets. And what's interesting...
Because to be clear, the puzzle that I grew up doing in high school during free periods with my friends, just like you did, was filled with arcana, like I said before, and filled with Latinate abbreviations and Chaucerian references and whatever obscurities were not going to be relevant to a kid that's like just went to a Jethro Tull concert.
Right, and that's Eugene Maleska. I mean, he was a notorious curmudgeon. He was a Latin and Greek teacher. You got the sense that if you didn't know the things that this erudite New York City man knew, that you'd get detention or something. The crossword felt like an AP exam, much more than an interesting curation of words and places and things. And, that kind of cultural pushback is always happening. I mean, when Will Shortz takes over the helm in 1993, there are moments where his blind spots are hilarious and interesting. So someone submits a puzzle. This is a 15-letter answer, which crossword constructors love. And the answer is everything bagel. And Will Shortz is like, what is that? This is a man who lives 20 miles north of Manhattan or something like that. It's really...
He did take the train into NPR every week to tape his spot, so he may have had a bagel once or twice.
It's criminal. It's a criminal thing, and I was offended. And but this happens all the time. He refuses to run a puzzle, another 15-letter answer. Oops, I Did It Again, which was at the time a #1 hit. And he just wasn't convinced about Britney's staying power. And so he rejected the puzzle and then accepted it again maybe a year and a half later.
Will's blind spots have been targeted by constructors particularly, especially in the last decade or so, as there's been a growth in the diversity of constructors and a movement to get different voices into particularly the Times. At the same time, the internet, as you mentioned before, has had this democratizing effect. Yeah. You don't like Will Shortz's ability to understand trans culture or the paucity of women constructors or the continued overuse of dead white men in a puzzle. Well, go make your own puzzle and publish it online. How has that tension, and this is another interesting part of the book, I mean, that tension is real and persists, but it feels like there's this release because of the opportunity to publish puzzles elsewhere and the rise of younger, more diverse, aware, open editors in different places.
Absolutely. I mean, there's an interesting timeline here, which is that, the Times takes its games app, and at this time it's just the crossword app, in-house in 2014. And so people who didn't grow up like you and I did solving in paper, a younger crop of solvers emerges at this time. And when COVID hits, they are very interested in whether, the way all of us were reevaluating our jobs and our place in the productive universe, they start making their own puzzles. People who had told themselves they were solvers but not necessarily makers try their hand at it in this moment of lockdown. And also in lockdown, Oliver Roeder, the journalist, has this great line that in lockdown, perhaps more than any other moment in human history, more games were being played, right? This is a moment when people, for one thing, find social connection on Zoom with their friends, but also there's a whole part in the book about the crossword streak. Doing the puzzle every day is a stand-in for forward progress in a moment of lockdown and stasis. So there's all of these factors that lead to younger people solving on the app, be able to reach a larger solvership because COVID has expanded the interest and made the economics more available for puzzles. And so you get this enormous push against the Times. It starts as blog puzzles, right? People have a puzzle where they're, for one thing, able to respond to current events. So I remember solving a puzzle way back in 2009, the day after Sonia Sotomayor was confirmed. It was a blog puzzle that had her full name. And it was sort of invigorating to see yesterday's news kind of imprinted or immortalized in a crossword puzzle, right? The puzzle has a hand in shaping what common knowledge is. And so you had this enormous group of young, tech-savvier, a little bit hipper, certainly, but just wider ranging in their cultural sensibilities. This set of constructors who, because of the economics of COVID and post-COVID, are installed as editors at New York Mag, at the Boston Globe, at Vox. All of these places are expanding their digital games
and these places
offerings.
That didn't have puzzles are adding puzzles like the New Yorker, where you've edited, right?
Yeah, I've been a constructor at the New Yorker for a while, and to your earlier point, these are outlets that are self-consciously pushing back against the Times. I mean, for one thing, the Times because it is sort of the gold standard or seen as such, thinks of itself as aimed at the, average solver, whoever that is, right? It's this constantly moving target, this shadowy fabulation that doesn't really exist, but the Times tries to hit that moving target. Other outlets are able to be weirder or more niche. The New Yorker puzzle is much more literary, and that's okay. There's an outlet called Puzzmo that is aimed at newer solvers and interested in taking them on the solving journey if they've been intimidated by the Times puzzle. So yeah, there's an enormous crush of new constructors that can only really exist because of that pushback against the Times and because the economics work during and after COVID.
Let's talk a little bit more about race, gender, politics in puzzles and how the Times will particularly has responded to some of these criticisms and how they've manifest in the paper and how it's changing across the spectrum of puzzle making.
Yeah, so the Times has misstepped in a bunch of sort of obvious ways. As recently as 2012, you could find the clue, one caught by Border Patrol for the answer illegal, right? There are many other ways to clue that word. It's very easy to avoid that kind of misstep. At the same time, there was a moment where the Times allowed a racial slur into the puzzle, the word beaner, when tried to clue it as a baseball term. As a longtime baseball player and lover,
not a baseball
term.
Not
a thing, just not a thing. And this was after protestation from people close to the puzzle, test solvers, the entire infrastructure around the Times raised the alarm, and still it made it through because it was a dictionary word. That has, as we're talking about, led to people looking elsewhere to publish their puzzles and maybe start their own outlets. But it's also led to an attempt to make over the personnel at the time. So the second chapter of the book goes all the way back from my 2.5-hour journey to Will Shortz's house, where it's just me and him in an attic and a clipboard, eating Campbell's soup and editing puzzles, to now when the Puzzles and Games division, which is what it ought to be called, it's a department at the Times, has some 36, business analysts, UX designers. This is a small army devoted to creating this app, which
the Times says that 11.2 billion of their puzzles were solved last year.
It's insane. Last year was the first year users, which is what they are, spent more time on the Games app than the News app, right? And there's an internal joke.
Laugh at your own peril.
Yeah. It's funny and it's scary, right? It's savvy and it's dystopian. It's just all true at the same time. There's an internal joke at the Times that they are now a gaming company that just happens to offer news, and you can feel that in the way they talked about Wordle. But in any case, the interesting thing about these crossword politics is that they're a long-standing thing. So in the book, I talk about the entry Mau Mau, M-A-U, M-A-U. 2/3 vowels. That's very useful if you are a puzzle maker. These are the anti-colonial rebels who overthrew British colonial rule in Kenya. In 1953, the rebellion begins in 52. In 1953, you'll see a clue in the New York Times for Mau Mau that reads Kenyan menace or African terrorist, right? And that othering lens is the same lens that you would have seen in the reportage about that issue at the same time if you flip to the international news desk. It's not until 2013 that the clues speak any modicum of truth to power, and you see a clue like Kenyan rebels who fought British colonials. Same 6 letters, same historical event, but the crossword, which is the place we come expecting encyclopedic one-to-one relationship between clue and answer, is this force of cultural arbitration. It's always picking sides. It can't not.
It's like everything involving language is political. And the crossword puzzle, we shouldn't be surprised, is political. But it has this amazing power, I think, a personal hold over us. You write in the book, a crossword doesn't make anything happen, but it's a way of gathering the world. And I loved that line. And, I'm going to humble brag here for a second and say that being in the New York Times crossword puzzle is like one of the greatest thrills of my life. Stefan has been an answer, and I just looked this up, and New York Times answer 9 times in the Will Shortz era, 6 for tennis player Stefan Edberg, 2 times for me, and once for early king of Serbia. I don't know who that is.
The big 3.
The big 3. And Word Freak, my book about Scrabble, was a 17 across once, which was
that's
pretty
amazing.
cool too. I know,
When
right?
was that?
But I think it goes back to the sort of like what the puzzle means to us,
Yeah.
right? What it means to you. You see your life reflected back, maybe not necessarily in a clue or an answer. I'm very lucky to have had that happen. But we see things that help us identify with the world and our place in it.
Yeah, the constructor Laura Bronstein has a really lovely quote that the crossword is one version of the things we need to know to go out into the world. It's this collection of what matters, and it's one scaffolded view into what matters, and it's going to change day to day, but solving it feels like accessing things that have that kind of immortality, like you and your book. And it's absolutely the case that, in the book I talk about word squares, which has a Scrabble resonance, especially because of the technology, but these were n by n grids where you could read them the same, left to right as top to bottom, and generating them.
And they go back to like ancient Rome.
This is like 61 CE on one of the balustrades of Pompeii or whatever. You'll see like the Satyr Square. So any of you who've seen the Christopher Nolan movie Tenet, that's based on the Satyr Square, which has a palindromic message in it. And word squares were like fun sort of voodoo medicine. You would write a word square onto a piece of bread if you had rabies in the 1800s and eat it, and I'm told be cured. And they have this like incantatory ability, or at least they seem to. And in the book, I profile the first person to try to computationally generate word squares, right? This is late 80s, adding algorithmic grease makes the program runnable as opposed to, slower or faster. And there's this world where he starts generating word squares for his friends, seeding them with, 7-letter answers in their names. And he writes, my friends would get really interesting birthday presents. And I was kind of like, are they? but what's interesting is the thing you're talking about, which is seeing your name among the other words that have also been canonized on the grid. It lends a gravitas to your letters.
Did you do the puzzle today? You did not. I asked
did
you this
not. No,
downstairs.
yeah.
All right.
Sorry.
So, in a pleasant bit of serendipity, today's puzzle, the clue for 62 across, Natan, is cookie containing about 50 calories.
That's it?
The answer, of course, is
Oreo.
All right. I checked. It was Oreo's 513th appearance in the New York Times since 1942, which seems like a lot.
Right.
But there's a backstory here that you write about. There was something called the Oreo Cluing Project that some crossword constructors did a few years ago. And there's an interesting backstory to clues, to answers like Oreo.
Yeah, I mean, these answers are what we call crosswordese, right? Words that, because of their letter patterns, constantly repeat in puzzles. And, the phonotactic skeleton of English, the way English looks under the hood, owes a lot to the fact that it's got Germanic roots. So in the top row of a crossword, you might see words that are kind of 80% consonant, like stack or block, right? And underneath those, you need the release valve of aioli and Oreo, right? Words that are mostly vowels and have consonants that blend. And that's just the way English looks structurally. It requires these repeat offenders. And Oreo has been obviously not clued as the cookie since the 40s. It was clued from 1942 until 1993 as this Greek prefix, which means like mountain in a combined form. I don't understand it, but
Oros.
Yeah.
Meaning, yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah. Please tell us. You're a Greek speaker.
Yeah. Oros is mountain.
There you go. And what does combined form mean?
And I'm not a linguist. Sorry.
Okay.
I just wrote a book about the dictionary. I don't pretend to be a linguist.
Yeah, I think it's like a fancy way of saying prefix, maybe. But there's a bird called the Oreotrix, which is on mountains. Anyway, brand names were verboten. And so it's not until 1993 that
Because
you
of
can
Will.
finally clue. Yeah, Will Shortz takes over then. You can finally clue Oreo as the cookie. But now we have this problem of how do we clue it in a new way? One of the worst tasks as a crossword writer is facing down, your umpteenth at bat to clue Oreo. And this constructor, Ada Nicole, did another crowdsourcing exercise. She started this thing called the Oreo Cluing Project, where she sourced as many new, novel, and just weird clues for Oreo as she could. I think she got hundreds of them.
I'll read a few.
Great.
Because some of them are great. Okay. Cookie whose filling can be replaced with toothpaste in a cruel prank. Cookie whose Twitter account recommends eating all the cookies from the middle sleeve, then filling the empty sleeve with milk for dunking, which, what the hell? Cookie split by Ross and Rachel in the first Friends episode.
I did not remember that.
Yeah. One more. Cookie that Ben Carson confused with a foreclosure-related term.
My favorite one is apt rhyme for gory yo, because it's real messy when I eat them.
Yeah. Good. Yes, that one's in there too. All right, why don't we open up to some questions from the audience? And I believe there's a microphone there.
Anyone? Questions?
Behind you. Behind you.
Hey, Sam.
Hi, Natan. I had a question about the story you told where the crossword solvers were booing the automated crossword solver, Dr. Phil.
Yeah.
I'm just curious if you can tell us more about that moment, why you included that story, what takeaways do you think that has for today, technology and games and how we play games?
And I'll append that by saying that, tell us a little bit about how LLMs and AI are now a part of the future of crosswords.
Yeah, absolutely. So Dr. Phil, F-I-L-L, is a automated crossword solver created by this computer scientist, AI researcher, mathematician, Matt Ginsberg. And this is the era of symbolic AI. So in the book, I do a whole song and dance comparing old school AI techniques to Alice in Wonderland, more symbolic logic, more rule-based, and then Frankenstein, which is kind of modern LLMs, right? Massive ingestion of data, kind of a black box, but still faster than we are. And this old piece of crossword solving software, Dr. Phil, when it came onto the scene, Matt Ginsberg knew that he was playing the villain, and he leaned into it. He wore a shirt with a target on it at the first crossword tournament where Dr. Phil competed. Will Shortz printed 150 I beat Dr. Phil buttons to hand out at that tournament. Dr. Phil came in 143rd, so he nailed it. That solver, a couple things. One, the constructors in that tournament were out for blood. They did not want some computer coming in and doing the thing that they were good at. And so one of the puzzles that totally confounded this AI solving system was based on the Greek word boustrophodon, which means as the ox plows. So old Semitic languages like Greek, you'd chisel up and then you'd get to the top of the column or whatever, and you just go down and then write backwards, left to right. And so a lot of old Semitic languages have alternating right to left and then left to right, where the letters are backwards. And they look wonderful and calligraphic and strange. But there was a puzzle based on that, and so every other row you had to enter the words in backwards. And what's beautiful is that after a couple of minutes, or many minutes in some cases, many of the human solvers cottoned onto it. They knew what was going on, but these are just random strings to the crossword solver. And so it tanked that puzzle, and everyone cheered. There's a whole piece in the book, and it's interesting because LLMs have only gotten better about the ways when it comes to making puzzles that AI is helpful and not helpful. There's also just the plain issue of, even if it was really good, I and many players of games, I think, would still do it. The pleasure I get in making a grid, in writing a good clue, I think isn't going to go away. there's a thing where working with the software can actually produce a more interesting puzzle also. So there was a constructor who noticed that the word sore loser repeats every single letter except for the L. It's really hard to ask the human brain to come up with any more examples of that. That's a very difficult kind of search, but a 4-line Python script or a quick LLM prompt will produce examples like Hippocratic Oath, which repeats every single letter except for the R. And it takes a human moment of ingenuity to decide, well, I'm going to have the extra letters spell out in order leftovers. So that's a moment where the human and the machine are working together to produce something more interesting than either of them could have done before.
To follow up, though, Dr. Phil finished 143rd in that first American Crossword Puzzle Tournament, but Dr. Phil has gotten a lot better since then, and because of...
Yeah, modern LLMs. It used BERT for a while. I mean, it's basically the story of... There's a thing in AI research concept called the bitter lesson. It's enticing and seductive to try to hand program the sometimes logical way that we think into these systems, but every single task ends up being beaten by big data, rapid computation, just avalanche. And so, that was true of chess. It's true of Google Translate, right? It's true of lots of these tasks where just the drinking from the fire hose of data is what works, and that's the way it is.
And that's the case with almost every mind game at this point.
Yep.
I mean, Go has been solved by computers, believed to be the most difficult game to figure out. Puzzles, crossword puzzles, because of the flood of LLMs have become sort of more solvable. Scrabble is mostly solvable, though humans can still win because there's an element of luck. So it's I mean, what you're saying is, because you can make a puzzle now. Constructors there's software you go and you just can automatically have it fill, but an automated puzzle when you see one, right?
Yeah. You can sniff it. It's got that Apple Store blandness to it for sure.
Any other questions? Okay, let me.
Right there before you go.
I just wanted to ask, when was that? When was the crossword tournament that Dr. Phil was first at?
It debuts in 2012 and it wins in 2021. It's the online tournament that is due to COVID, and it hangs up its cleats after that. Dr. Ginsburg, like Frankenstein's monster, he's a real doctor. He doesn't want to compete anymore. He thinks if he wins again, they'll be like, ease up on the poor humans, and if you lose, you can just call it a fluke. So one and done. No more Dr. Phil.
Questions over here?
Yeah, Natan, I had a related question about data. So you mentioned that there were 11 billion crosswords solved last year. And I'm curious how else the Times uses data, and particularly as they think about puzzles getting harder, if there are targets, like a puzzle should be solvable by a certain percentage of people each day, but how sort of non-AI, non-LLM, but still like an enormous amount of data that's being collected on users is influencing sort of how they think about puzzles.
Yeah, this is the standard A/B testing of a big digital outfit. So the Times rolls out its puzzles in a very particular way based on a market segmentation it knows about us. I did not get the Scrabble.
I can talk about that. But go ahead,
I'd love to hear that. It also, kind of one of the things you're gesturing to that I find interesting and a little troubling is that there's now an incentive for accessibility. So one of the ways this manifests is there's a mode called easy mode for the, I think, Friday New York Times puzzle. And that's meant in the most generous interpretation to bring in solvers who had previously felt kept out of one of the more difficult puzzles out there. But it's also a way to just make another product that a different number of people will solve. I'm very good friends with Winna Liu, who edits Connections, and she does feel bad when people write in saying this was too hard. I think the way that the customer is always right mentality has pervaded the Times, guides them a little bit more based on this data to a breadth that sometimes is like a curmudgeonly old-time solver I find annoying.
And I can add to that. I'm actually writing a piece about the Times' new Scrabble clone, Crossplay, which some of you have seen, which debuted last week. And it's when you can play against other people, which is interesting. And they've actually built a pretty good analyzer for the game. Sort of as with Wordle, you can see what the options were and what your best move might have been. And they've done, even compared to other Scrabble bots, which are far more sophisticated, this isn't bad, according to like the expert Scrabble players that have programmed other bots. But the one thing that they've done when you're playing the computer on Crossplay, there are 3 modes: easy, medium, and hard. And the hard mode is so absurdly easy. And I don't just say that as a competitive Scrabble player. I actually road tested this with a friend who's not a competitive Scrabble player. I mean, I played the hard mode, the hardest mode on the bot, 30 times. The bot didn't break 300 points. It never came close to winning. It didn't make a bingo in 30 games. And I asked the Times about it, and they said, yeah, we've programmed this to be really easy. And that is you want the customer to feel like, oh, I beat the hard bot. I must be a really good cross-play player. So I think this is how do they do the thing with the Friday puzzle? They just make someone's writing easier clues?
Yeah, someone else writes easy. I actually think it's Christina Iverson, who's one of the new editors, is in charge of developing a set of easy clues for whose ever puzzle is running that Friday. And that's
And only on Friday.
I'm not certain about that, but I think so. It's a bit of a weird proposition, as you spend a lot of time, especially on a Friday or Saturday puzzle, really chiseling the clues. You want cleverness, you want a interesting, breadth of culture that's being asked for, and to have someone else take your grid and kind of reinterpret it can be
dumb it down, basically.
Dumb it down. It doesn't feel great.
I had a particular question, but does the Times group putting the puzzles out by less common fill words? So my example was on Sunday, one of the words was Sbarro, and I swear that came up twice last week, and that's really kind of strange.
I don't think so. I think it is that really fun, cognitive sensation of I see it once, so I'm primed for it again. I've talked to Will about this, and he's definitely not. But
so it's just complete happenstance when Sbarro shows up twice in a row?
Well, it's a delicious pizza place.
True.
But I don't think it's intentional. As far as I know, it's not. But I do like the conspiracy theory. I think it's a good way to get people to know some of the crosswordese that will come back.
There was a question over here. Okay. As a constructor, how do you feel about speed solvers?
This is a great question.
And as someone who's competed in the American Crossword Puzzle Tournament, which you have, right?
I have competed. Have you competed?
No.
It's a different game in a way. So I think that the thing that they are doing is taking lots of information, rapidly decoding it, and filling a grid as fast as possible. There are these superhuman moments where there's 2 funny examples. One is a speed solver versus someone who made the puzzle. Speed solver wins. There's an example where it's a speed solver versus someone just writing their name over and over again in the grid. Speed solver wins. It's an interesting game. It's a different game than solving a regular puzzle. On paper, you do things like always use a lowercase e because it's one stroke rather than the for capital E. There are all these tricks that are cool, but as a constructor, you definitely have that instinct of wanting someone who's going to savor the puzzle a little bit. I think all of that is happening just at a faster rate, but I don't ever make puzzles with speed solvers in mind. If anything, I'm someone who's known for kind of hard puzzles, and I like when speed solvers treat me like a speed bump. It's kind of nice.
And they are remarkable, by the way, right? The champions are incredibly brained people. I interviewed Paolo Pasco, the 2-time champion, in his 20s, a crossword creator, games creator, and a lovely human being too. But what he can do just stretches our sort of understanding of how the human mind works. Didn't he like finish a Monday puzzle in like 49 seconds?
I think he's sub one on Mondays. Yeah,
sub one on a Monday.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
It just feels like it's underappreciated.
Yeah.
The cleverness which some of these themes and the puzzles you put together, it just feels like it might
Yeah.
like those people.
I agree, but I do think it's an aesthetic thing. But I agree.
So part of my Sunday routine in doing the puzzle, generally with my daughter, is thinking as I'm going along what clues Rex Parker is going to hate and which ones he's going to like and whether he thinks it's easy. And oftentimes we're spot on when we read about what he says afterwards. I'm curious what you guys think of him. Or do you know him?
Yes, Rex Parker. Yeah, for those who don't know, there is an English professor named Michael Sharp who, under the name Rex Parker, reviews the New York Times puzzle every single day, and he is angry. He's always quite upset that the puzzle happened, and every now and then he likes it. He likes my puzzles because we are friends in real life, which just goes to show you, don't believe everything you read in the newspaper. But it's interesting, at the beginning of my journey into making puzzles, Rex Parker was the only, don't really need scare quotes, but you might, the only critic of puzzles around. It was someone who had a sensibility. He's an English professor, but also teaches comics and pop culture. So he liked Nabokov, and he liked The Simpsons, and I liked Nabokov, and I liked The Simpsons. So I remember wanting to impress him and putting Ned Flanders, another Simpsons reference, into the puzzle, and thrilling when he liked that
For the
answer.
first time, right?
For the first time, debuting it. Now, I mean, I think that job is hard to summon something interesting to say about the crossword load every single day for now. I think it must be something like 15 or 20 years. Is a Herculean effort. And in the way that these things tend to, his comment section, and even the comment section in the Times analog of this, the wordplay blog, they do kind of devolve into vitriol the way comment sections are wont to do. So it's oddly become easier, as there have been more voices shitting on your puzzle, to ignore them. And I don't really read him much anymore.
I just like when he counts how many days it's been since he's been a Star Wars reference.
Yeah. That's really
I mean, you said you don't read them anymore. I mean, did they bother you? Did you get, I've had one crossword puzzle published in the LA Times, and I got an email from someone saying, this is the worst puzzle I have ever done in my life. So, and it was a Thursday. It wasn't that easy. I mean, do the comments bother you? Did they bother you?
They must have when I was a 16-year-old, but also I was 16 and I had thicker skin. And I think I knew that it was just a crossword in a way. I mean, I think I was lucky because the first two puzzles that I published in the Times were received warmly. And I think they were good puzzles. And so I felt buoyed on to take any criticism in stride. And when you make a lot of puzzles, it's a bit like, I mean, I'm sure you feel this way about writing. At a certain point, you have to do it for you. If anything, reading Rex Parker convinced me that I need to kind of find my own crossword voice, as lofty as that might sound, because you just can't please all the people all the time. But yeah, sometimes it gets to you.
I think we have time for one more question. Anyone? Over here, okay.
Hey, Zach.
Hey, Natan. This is awesome. So one part of your book that I really resonated with was the story you told of the two siblings, and I think it was their mom, right? And yeah, I have a similar kind of relationship with my siblings and my parents, where it started during COVID. We have a text thread, and we do the puzzle, and we share our times, and even when we don't actually talk to each other, we feel connected, just taking a screenshot of our time for the day, and that's just a way to kind of have that connection that we might not otherwise have. And I'm just curious if you have any stories or relationships like that in your life with family, friends, in terms of the puzzle, and also kind of, given that you just live and breathe puzzles, and how that's kind of changed your agency as a solver, and kind of how your relationship as a solver with the puzzle.
Yeah, this story is about two siblings whose mother is diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. They are in different parts of the world and come to New York to be with her. They begin solving the crossword as a unit, brother, sister, and when she can help the mother in the hospital room. The brother hooks up his laptop to the hospital room TV, and they solve every single day together. She sadly passes away, and the siblings, she passes away a week before COVID. They hastily put together a funeral and a shiva, and then are in lockdown in their childhood home and decide to keep their crossword streak alive, which began when she was in the hospital, as this incantatory way of keeping her memory alive. And it means so much to them. And when the streak breaks, they just break down sobbing. They write to the Times, and interestingly, they lie and say, "We solved it. I don't know what your weird computer thing doesn't understand." But the Times reinstates it. And so I definitely have those moments. There are words that I know because my parents taught them to me. I kind of talk about this in the book, but my first name is a palindrome and my last name is autological. It means what it is. My last name is Last. And so I feel a little fated from birth to care about wordplay. But a lot of my memories involve the weird but still, I think, tender fact that my parents don't really care about crosswords that much. My mother is not a native English speaker, and she's a wonderful storyteller, but she doesn't often use language. She uses rhythm. She modulates her voice up and down. She'll tell a story like, "And then I went to the store, and then boom, and it happened," and you know when to laugh. And I love that about her, and I think it's made me appreciate the way that crosswords are defamiliarizing language. It's not always about meaning. It's sometimes about the way words look or the number of letters they have, and I definitely got that from my parents.
Well, thank you all for coming out on this snowy evening. Thank you and congratulations to Natan.
Thank you so much, Stefan, for doing this.
My pleasure. Our books are outside, and we are going to sit somewhere and sign them.
Yes,
we're going to
just
sit out there,
right
I guess,
here.
but it's Natan's show, so please make sure to buy his book. I can be a throw-in if you want.
Buy both.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.